The small homes and shared communal spaces of Jacksonville's signature bungalow courts are the very picture of what's often dubbed the new urbanism. But unlike idealized retro developments, these vintage communities are true vestiges of the past, often in need of significant investment and restoration. Here to talk about the history and future of one of these remaining communities is Spencer Fletcher. He's the owner of Oneida Bungalow Courts. Spencer, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're also joined by Tim Gilmore, author, educator, and historian at JaxPsychoGeo. Good morning, Tim. How are you?
Hey, Ann, I'm great. Good to be here.
It's good to have you, Tim. Can you sort of begin by placing this community of homes in a historical context? What are bungalow courts? Where did they come from?
So bungalow courts themselves are, historically they were affordable to people. They were almost built-in community spaces. Typically, they are a series of small bungalows that face inward on something like a courtyard, even if de facto. Originally, for example, Wade Drive, which is in the middle of Oneida Bungalow Court, was not paved. It's almost like it has a built-in community commons. And so they are, it's interesting that you said, they're kind of a vision of new urbanism. That's absolutely true. Developers now want to build things that look just like bungalow courts. There's a one in Springfield that is doing pretty well, I think. But this bungalow court, Oneida, it's at the center of a historic Black community that was called West Lewisville, which itself was eaten up by a white community called Mixontown, and it's really close to Brooklyn and Riverside, and is like a historical living museum. I mean, it spans incredible parts of history in our community, and it's a really historically important, significant place.
And it is near Riverside, as you mentioned, but Spencer, it's in some ways sort of on the wrong side of some dividing highways that cut right through this historic neighborhood of West Lewisville, I-10, I-95, and so it's sort of in that northwest quadrant that remains, but a lot of the vibrancy of that neighborhood was destroyed in the 50s by this interstate highway system.
Yeah, absolutely. About a third of the land. It probably started out as a 10 by 10 block neighborhood, and come 1950s, late 40s, 1950s, planning the interstate. That was the cheapest land at the time for the city to eminent domain, and they did. They took out about a third of the land. They cut it off from the surrounding communities, and it destroyed their commercial development that was there, essentially destroying the neighborhood.
So what drew you to it in the first place? As somebody, obviously it's a project that you can look at and say it's going to require some dollars to bring it up to modern levels. These are homes that have been deteriorating for some time, but they're also really charming. These, 24, I guess, remaining of the original 29 or so bungalows.
Yeah, originally 29, 5 have burned over the years, but it's like I had mentioned to you before, like walking back in time. And they were really obscured from the road. They were hard to see. There's not a lot of people that knew they existed prior to this sort of rediscovery, if you will. And it's just a strange feeling, nostalgic maybe. You go out there and you see these houses, how folks lived 100 years ago, and they still have a use today. I mean, the houses are still ergonomical. They're still nice. They're still pleasant. The community, the camaraderie, there's a lot of things that translate to today's communities, or should at least.
Yeah. This kind of community, Tim, there were a lot of them in Southern California. There was sort of this, Pasadena area was known for these, and there's still some there, but they overall have diminished around the country. And as you mentioned, there's, just a couple in Jacksonville. Jacksonville is one of the few cities that even has these remaining today. Some of the characteristics, though, I mean, for folks who are watching on our live stream, we're showing images of the community and people can see, but they have certain commonalities in how they look and how they're built. Will you tell us just a little bit about the shape, the front porch, kind of the design of these?
Yeah, I mean, when people, the word bungalow gets used in all sorts of different ways. There was someone about 100 years ago who wrote something called the Bungalow Book and said all that bungles is not a bungalow. And I think frequently people think of craftsman bungalows, which are spread throughout Riverside, Avondale, for example. These are, they're more modest than that. They're very, in a lot of ways, simple structures, but they're practical structures, and they do all have. Do they all have front porches? They all originally had front porches.
Every single one of them,
Yeah,
still today too.
every
Yeah.
single one a front porch. So the front porch is really this kind of transition space between the home and that commons space that is what people used to call Rock Road. Nobody who lived there back in the day, actually, from people I've talked to, called it Oneida or called it a bungalow court. They
Right.
called it Rock Road because there were what they called railroad rocks instead of pavement back in the 1970s or so. And so if you look at older maps of Jacksonville, there is, I sometimes think of it as kind of a black crown over the city because there's all of this dense, segregated black housing and neighborhoods, and it is really, really dense. A lot of it, from West Lewisville up into Brooklyn, La Villa, Hansontown, where FSCJ downtown campus is now, this kind of thin stretch between downtown and Springfield, and then over to the east side. And so much of that is completely gone.
Mhm.
It's astonishing in a lot of ways that Oneida is still existent, It did go through a couple of fires, but also, if it had been maybe more a part of Riverside, Avondale, I don't know. Maybe it would have been saved, or maybe at some point before preservation took hold, somebody would have just flattened it. It's astonishing that it's still there.
And the pictures that we're showing now really show the history of that place, the residents of that place. You've really managed to find some beautiful and just amazing photos of the residents, the school children who attended school in that area. What do we know about some of the residents, for instance, right now? The woman that we're looking at, who is has a name that will be familiar to people who follow local politics.
Yeah, the Gaffney family, that's Abby Gaffney. Abby Gaffney was born in rural Georgia during a time of slavery in the 1850s, late 1850s. And her family migrated to Florida, I'm going to guess sometime in the early part of the last century rather. And they moved to Oneida Bungalow Court around 1925.
And she was born a slave.
She was, yeah, born at the time of slavery. I'm not sure the details on that part of it, but
Okay.
certainly born at the time in rural Georgia. So, but yeah, she lived at the house with her family. She died at 463 Wade Drive in 1933. Me and Tim were talking earlier that it's unbelievable to think that I can walk into that house today and there's a connection to a time that it seems so foreign to us that existed 150 years ago, during a time of slavery, and there's a connection to that there.
And of course, the Gaffney name, Reggie Gaffney Sr., Reggie Gaffney Jr., both have served as city council members. One is currently still serving as a city council member. So I guess that lends itself to a question: what kind of city support have you gotten for rehabbing and restoring these structures?
Not a lot, and really nothing in the way of infrastructure support either, which is basic right-of-way maintenance like sidewalks and curbing. A lot of amenities that we take for advantage in our neighborhoods. They didn't have them. This neighborhood, I say, has been neglected for like 150 years now, and it's still being neglected. But not a lot. I've had a lot easier time getting support and discussing and emailing and calling state legislature, but not local.
All right. If you're just joining us, we are talking about Oneida Bungalow Court. It is in the historic neighborhood of West Lewisville. If you have a comment or question, you can join our conversation on air at 904-549-2937, or you can go to firstcoastconnect.org to find other ways to connect with us. We've got a call from Mike on the south side. Good morning, Mike. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. And talking about the history of the bungalow court, I was curious what year that bungalow court was initiated. When did it start? And then throughout Florida, we have motor courts. So the history of bungalow courts in Florida really has a lot to do with motor courts as well. But I was kind of interested in the history of that location, what year it started, and then the motor courts, bungalow courts in Florida. Thanks.
Thanks. Good question. It's my understanding that there is actually some crossover between the folks who created bungalow courts in the first place, we mentioned in Southern California, and the folks that invented the concept of the motel. So he's not wrong in sort of seeing that overlap there.
Yes. I think in general that's true. Motels were originally a portmanteau for motor hotels, right? And so if you look back to the 40s, 1940s, 30s, sometimes 20s, but that's getting pretty early, you see motor courts and motor inns. And there's a bunch of those actually still around Jacksonville, up and down Main Street,
US 1.
Yeah, absolutely. And, sometimes there's a number of those on Main Street, a good bit north of Springfield, but south of the Trout River still, that are now apartments that are not in good shape. This is really distinct from that, though, because this particular bungalow court, was always meant for really people who did not necessarily not only rely on transportation, but have that kind of transportation. Spencer and I were talking before about how people talk about walkability as an important factor in a neighborhood, and that's absolutely true, And so urban core neighborhoods are talked about in terms of walkability. Well, this place absolutely has walkability, but also, people did not have cars. And people there walked to nearby jobs. Minnie Gaffney McDaniel, who was a child when her house burnt down on Wade Drive, she walked to Old Stanton every day. She was born in,
And that's Abby Gaffney's daughter?
Granddaughter.
Granddaughter,
okay.
She was born in Brewster Hospital in La Villa, walked to Old Stanton. She's cousins with, Reggie and Don Gaffney. Don Gaffney, who broke football records when he played for FSU, and Reggie, who became city councilman. And,
Don Gaffney was maybe the first black quarterback?
I think so.
for FSU?
University of Florida. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Oh, was it? I'm sorry, University of Florida.
I think so.
Okay.
Oh, was it?
I think it was University
okay.
of Florida.
I'm sure there are plenty of.
Someone's going to fact check.
Yeah, I'm sure there. You'll get a call about that.
To
I'm
Mike's
sure.
question about the year that it was built, was that mid-20s ish?
1925 was developed by the Langle family, who were the first mayors and founders of La Villa.
Okay, and so you said you haven't gotten quite the support from the city that you would like to see. I should say that our colleagues at News4Jax did a story on this recently, and they spoke to the city. They got a statement that just said the city of Jacksonville's housing division and several city council members have had numerous meetings with the property owner and have offered funding solutions. We believe it's an important project and have asked the developer to meet the requirements that are necessary for any city investment. We're always happy to continue those conversations to work out an agreement that works both for the city and the neighborhood. So based on that, I mean, what do you think they think is missing from what you're proposing in terms of meeting the requirements that are necessary for any city investment?
Yeah, there were two things there. Well, one of them, the housing office had offered something, but I never saw any kind of contract, and the conversation sort of fell flat after that. But it was not economically feasible. And some of the other points that I've been bringing up for the longest time is about city infrastructure. The houses could be unbelievably nice, and if the road is in disrepair, if there's illegal dumping all over the property and around the neighborhood there, if there's no sidewalks and no curbing, there's no safe pedestrian traffic, with the additional commercial traffic in the area, if there's no adequate stormwater drainage, street lighting, for instance, who would want to live there now even?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think these things are really basic city amenities that need to be dealt with, and that's one of them that has never been answered to me. The answer that I got from my local representation, my city councilman, was that it's too expensive. I'm sorry, we can't find the funding to put in sidewalks here in this neighborhood.
I mean, it does seem that it would meet the priorities of some affordable housing, kind of that missing middle, perhaps even.
Absolutely, yeah.
What do you envision would be, the ideal or best use of this? Because certainly, if you had, all the money in the world, this could also be a very kind of, more high end housing, very attractive in its, its appearance. But do you see this as an affordable housing project ultimately? Is that what you
Yeah,
would like?
and I think it needs to pay some homage to the neighborhood too. I mean, I don't think that we're going to benefit as a community and as a city by removing the people that have lived there and live there now and may have been there for the last century. I think to do something right is to have at least a segment or a portion of affordable housing, but that has to be somewhere. It has to be subsidized, whether by the city or state. There has to be some assistance that comes in to allow me to do that.
And you mentioned that you have seen a little bit more interest / support at the state level. Tell us about that, because we mentioned at the outset, we're still in budget season, even though it's supposed to have wrapped up a couple weeks ago. The legislature is going to have to reconvene. They're still apart, without agreement, some, more than $1 billion dividing them. So there's a lot of appropriations that could be made or could not be made. What are you hoping to get?
We hope that our appropriations passes in the House and continues up through the governor. But yeah, we've had a lot of support. We've had a lot of calls and emails with House representatives and Senate members, especially the local ones, and all have been very supportive, very easy to get in touch with, and have been unbelievably helpful.
And so, what have they proposed? What are they proposing in terms of funding, and what would that pay for?
Predominantly infrastructure stuff on the property. So about $650,000 through an organization called Preservation SOS, which is a local preservation not-for-profit. And I think that the big ticket items that need to be addressed, that are generally a singular check written out, is in-ground plumbing and electrical, roofs, sidewalks on the property, not on city right-of-way. Just a lot of basic but big ticket items infrastructure-wise.
Mm-hmm. And what is your sense of how realistic that is? I mean, obviously getting support from Democrats, local Democrats, is key, and yet they're also not necessarily the most powerful voices in a Republican-led legislature.
I think this is bipartisan. I mean, I've had a lot of support from both sides of the aisle. It is really hard when you go out and see this place in person, when you see those photographs, to say this needs to be torn down. In fact, I have not met that person yet. I know people do think it, I'm sure, but at least on the legislature side, from the state side, I have not met that person yet. Everybody has been unbelievably supportive in this endeavor, and they can see the value in it. I mean, they see the historical and cultural value that I do, that Tim does, that a lot of other people do. I don't necessarily get that same feeling from the local representation, city council, et cetera, but on the state level, I have.
Mm-hmm. And we should say we did get a correction from my associate producer, Bella. Don Gaffney was the first Black quarterback to play for the University of Florida. So,
okay.
Sorry about that.
I want to ask Tim, in terms of where this ranks. This property was placed on the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation's 11 to Save list last year. It was just one of 3 in Jacksonville to earn that designation. And it is part of a set of buildings in Jacksonville that are unique in Florida, in the sense that this is a place, according to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, has more pre-1967 buildings than any other Florida city. Jacksonville does.
Oh, man. Historically, and I think there are a lot of people in town now changing this, but historically, Jacksonville's done a terrible job talking about itself, celebrating its history, celebrating the incredible architecture that we have in this town. One of the things that I think is really interesting and really important is that, by the criteria of, let's say, I don't know, the 1980s, if people were looking at historical buildings or architecture, Oneida probably would not have ranked on many people's scales. Uh, people
Because
people were mainly looking at structures that had belonged to wealthy people, powerful people, and that often, meant white people. I mean, that's just a fact. And so Oneida, even when you look at the promises that were made to black community leaders before consolidation, to vote for consolidating city of Jacksonville and Duval County. That was because so much of the central. I mean, this is still amazes me, even though I've known this a long time. The central housing in our city did not have basic amenities like paved roads and indoor plumbing. So I have recently seen photographs by the photographer Jay Schutz of the east side right next to the stadium in the 1990s where streets weren't paved. You know, that should be shame. That should be embarrassing, I think, to anybody who cares about this city. And one of the things that I love about Spencer's attitude toward this place is absolutely somebody could turn it into some high end thing. I think it's there. But Spencer loves the historic community, and he does, as he just said, that it should pay. Whatever's done with Oneida should pay homage to that community, and Oneida makes so many connections across time, across our culture, across our community, that I think anybody on city council, anybody who has any power whatsoever, should make it a priority to save and should be proud of themselves for doing so.
Spencer, I want to ask you about a particular element of this history that you have tried to showcase, and that is around this gas station. It's I guess, a former Shell station at the corner of Edison Avenue and Goodwin Street. You have occupied that building, but there is a mural on it that is an honor of a naval aviator. You've got a background in the military as well, I believe.
I do. I was a naval aviator. Yeah.
Okay.
It, I think a hero to a lot of people. There was a film that was put about him, but pretty recently, Jesse Brown was his name, Ensign Jesse Brown. But the connection there, which I think is fascinating, you're talking about the city of Jacksonville not honoring and celebrating its history, but he went to flight school at NAS Jax. He lived in Jacksonville. I don't know where at, but this was 1950s Jacksonville, and it was likely in a community like West Lewisville that he lived in. And I think that's incredible that we don't know that. I mean, there's a picture of him on the base, but if I've asked 100 people in my community and around the city if they knew that he lived here for some time and went to flight school here and was winged here, a lot of people would say no.
This is the first black naval aviator in U.S. history?
In U.S. history, yeah. And in fact, sort of a strange, sad story, if you will, but the commanding officer at NAS Jax would not wing him. Which is part of the ceremony for them to, give the wings, of gold, put them on their chest, and he would not wing them.
And so how did that happen?
I guess someone else just gave him the wings later on, but he was not able to participate like he normally would have in the ceremony.
He was killed in the Korean War, was a recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross. And so tell us about the mural that honors him in this community.
Yeah, a friend of mine, this thing spoke to me. The film came out. I was familiar with the story. There's some photographs of him on the base there, and it spoke to me. And I wanted to put him on the side of the building because not a lot of people knew that he lived here. I think it's incredible that piece of history. There should be stuff of him downtown. I don't know. I just don't understand forgetting something like that. That's a huge piece of history.
Yeah. Tim Gilmore, in terms of I want to read an email we got and kind of get your thoughts about it. This says, it says, I love the human aspect of bungalow courts. People often never encounter their neighbors. However, on architecture and philosophy, what would your guest say about how the style would affect human behavior if bungalow courts became so popular that they were the predominant housing strategy? We should say, in addition to that shared communal space, the sort of front-facing front porches, one of the appeals of these bungalow courts was that they functioned a little bit like condos because you didn't have that maintenance. It was sort of a shared communal space. And so it also was suitable, I guess, at the time for single women, working women, seniors. There sort of was like an element to communities that perhaps could use this kind of housing.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting question, and I think that emailer points out some really important things, and I think that can probably best be answered by looking at some of the people who lived there. There was someone named Charlie Cole who was a janitor for about half a century. He took
Yeah.
over in 1970, and his father was janitor there before that. And maybe janitor isn't even right. I mean, he did general maintenance and all,
Maybe in everything, man. I'm not sure he
everything.
has what to
Yeah,
describe.
right. But he's got these sharp memories. He remembered all the kids playing together. He remembered fish fries. He remembered the community babysitter. He said he remembered her taking snuff. He said, and that her house was always full of babies. And so, and there was music, and people went to school together and went to church together, and it was an incredibly vibrant community. It really was. I'm often reminded of this really kind of strange irony that during segregation, black communities, they were walled off, they were pocketed together, and they had strong senses of community together, and that was often through their community institutions like their churches, and they throve. And this is an example of that. And I think that it's place affects people's psychology, and the structure of this place certainly helped out with that too.
There were no locks on the doors. Talking to some of the residents there, uh, during segregation time, from the time it was built to maybe the 1950s, there were no locks on the doors. No one locked their doors. They still consider the people that they grew up with out there as family. The camaraderie, the relationships, it's incredible.
Well, it is a fascinating place and one that we hope sticks around for a long time. Spencer Fletcher is the owner of Oneida Bungalow Courts. Tim Gilmore is a local historian and author. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ann.